Before the next episode of X Job Downloaded starts, I have a big favour to ask. If you've enjoyed any of our episodes so far, please can you click on the follow button on your platform. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon and YouTube. It costs nothing to follow, but makes a real difference to me as a podcast producer. Thank you. This interview is being tape recorded. My name is Paul Maleary and this is X Job Downloaded. And today I'm going to interview my old boss and friend, Keith Dobson. Now, Keith was a soldier, served out in the Falklands amongst other places, joined the police. He's now a published author, or just about to be a published author, I should say. Keith, thank you so much for your time today and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning. And thanks for getting me out of bed so early.
It's been a long time since anybody said that to me, mate. I was normally going through the door with a warrant, but...
yeah, that's right.
But yeah, Keith, thank you so much, as I say. And where did it all begin? You're from the Northeast, but where did it all begin for Keith Dobson?
What, right at the beginning?
Right at the beginning, mate, yeah.
Okay. Well, so I was born in 1962, believe it or not.
You don't look old enough. You've still got all your own hair. That's not fair.
Yeah, it might be somebody else's hair, but I won't go into secrets. Yeah, I was born in 62. I thought about this. I don't like the class systems. I don't like working class, middle class, upper class, all that sort of thing. But I came from a very... a family that worked hard for a living. My father worked in the CEGB, which is the Central Electricity Generating Board.
Yeah.
And he worked shifts all his life. Very seldom did I see him. Christmas Day, he would arrive back from work, spend an hour with the kids and then go to bed, birthdays and stuff like that. So very hard-working man. And a mother who was a mother at home. I have two brothers and one sister who still live up the Northeast, as my mum does. My dad sadly died now. But a very hard-working family with very little to go on. My parents never learned to drive all their lives, which is, I find, incredibly amazing in today's day and age. So everywhere we went on holiday was on a bus or a train, but mainly a bus because they were cheaper than trains. So holidays for us was generally in a caravan in Hartlepool. And my dad chose that because my dad worked for the CEGB, for the power stations supplying the electricity. He had an affiliation with the miners and the mines. And near Hartlepool, I always have this vivid memory that when we stayed in the caravan on one occasion, he traipsed us all to a nearby village, I think called Black Hall, something to do with coal. There was a big mine there. And because he had an affiliation with the miners, he was able to eat in their canteen. So we stayed in the caravan and he took his family for a slap up in the miners' canteen every day.
How funny is that?
And you paid about $3 bob, for the whole family. And we had this huge 3-course meal. And it was my dad's treat to us to sit with all these miners with blackened faces and orange jumpsuits on and sit and eat with them. So that was sort of my upbringing with a family. But my mum was very disciplined and is disciplined, although sadly she suffers from Alzheimer's or dementia at the moment, and she's in a care home. But she was a very disciplined woman, brought her children up very strictly. One of the things that, again, I remember is that we never lived in a council house because she was too proud. She didn't want us to live off the state in any way at all. So she went that extra mile to find extra money. And we always lived in a rented house rather than a council estate. They couldn't afford it,
No.
but they found the money, and she went out doing cleaning jobs and stuff like that. And the other thing was that when I went to school, I was eligible because of they were means tested, and I was eligible for free dinners at school. You know, the free dinner tickets. Yeah. I don't know if in Essex you had that sort of thing.
Yeah,
certainly did up north. So, but she wouldn't allow. She found the additional money to pay for the dinners because she didn't want the children to be seen queuing for free dinners. So she always paid for it, and that was the kind of woman that she was in those days. So that sort of formed my early years by having this discipline and this, you got to do better. She always used to say, do better. There's always something else out there that you can do. And that was my upbringing with that sort of family environment.
Was that in Newcastle?
Yeah. So, that was in Gateshead, which is immediately south of the river of Newcastle. But yeah, I was born and bred in Gateshead, but with huge Newcastle connections because my dad had 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and my mum had 5 brothers and sisters as well. So we had an extended family. Some lived in Newcastle, some lived in Gateshead. So if you want to disappear from your parents at any time, I had a huge extended family to go, and cousins all over the shop, uncles, aunts, and I could just disappear for days if I wanted to, as long as my mum knew where I was and who I was staying with. So I had that variety of people all the time because so many people had different lifestyles, had different backgrounds, although they were all from the same 2 families. But I would learn from uncles and learn from aunts what they did in life, where have they been in life. So although I had this very sort of small bubble of a life with my parents and my sister and 2 brothers, I had this extended family to learn from.
And Hartlepool, put in perspective, is probably only about 30 miles down the road from Gateshead, isn't it? When you're going on holiday?
Yeah. It's a long time on a bus, I can remember.
We're talking about an era where, you know, you're born in 62, you're only 17 years after the end of the Second World War. By the time you get to 1970, we're talking about Kes, the film, and all the and social deprivation. I think people seem to forget. They talk about social deprivation now. Social deprivation then was pretty grim. You know, people would go and take coal from the coal yard because they couldn't afford to buy it, and it was a harsh lifestyle.
Well, just to illustrate that on 2 points, because my dad worked for the power station, I can remember we always had a coal fire, and Dad used to always light the fire. That was his job. It was always off when we were always cold when he wasn't there, but when he came home, the fire came on. And partly the reason for that is he used to bring a backsack home full of coal from the power stations. Right. That's where we got our fuel. We didn't buy it. He'd bring it home. And it always used to be like a foot by a foot. And we'd sit in the backyard with a hammer and a chisel and cut it into little bits. And the other thing is, I remember this, in our toilets, the toilet paper always had CEGB printed on the very rough hard toilet paper in the toilet. And I think thirdly, just to illustrate, and you've probably seen this on TV, because the other thing is that when you're born up north in those days, there is a north-south divide, and you don't know much about the south of England and how people are getting on because you don't have mobile phones, television's very, there's only a couple of channels on television, so it's your world. You only learn about your world wherever you are. And I remember when we went to the caravan, we had a pot-belly stove in the caravan. Can you imagine a pot-belly stove in a caravan now? And we used to every night when the tide went out, we'd go down to the beach and collect coal that had been washed up onto the beach, and we'd fill our buckets and take it back, and that filled the pot-belly stove in the caravan.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So you've gone through your schooling. What was the inspiration for you to join the army? You know, why did you go down that route?
Well, I, I wasn't great at school, and I again, I've got memories of when, again, school was very disciplined in those days, and you either excelled or you didn't. There was no middle ground. You either did well or you didn't. And if you weren't showing any, qualities at the early stages, you got put into classes which weren't going anywhere. And they were full of rowdy people and full of bullies and full of people who were disinterested. So if you had a nub of, I want to do better, it got drowned out by the environment, the people around you. So I really did want to do better. My mum, lashed that out of me several times to do better. But I was surrounded in people that didn't. So in actual fact, I left school with very, very few qualifications. Quite a few qualifications, but nothing that you'd want to share with anybody. And so I was faced with this. Well, what am I going to do? And my dad took me for a few jobs, and I didn't get through the exams. I mean, this amazes me nowadays. It doesn't when you work it out, but he took me for an interview to be a bricklayer, and I failed. And at that time, I thought, how can you fail to be a bricklayer? What do? You just put a brick on top of another brick. How can you fail the exam? With Wimpy it was. But actually it wasn't. It was all mathematics. It was, you've got 6 meters by 7 meter wall. If you use bricks of a certain height and shape and how many, and then you've got a corner. And of course, I didn't do well in maths. And, I remember not doing my homework correctly in a maths lesson. And when the lesson started, I went and queued up with all the kids. I got to the front, and I remember the female teacher screamed at me for getting it all wrong and told me to stand in the corner for the remainder of the lesson, facing the corner, while she taught the other kids. Now, I wanted to learn, but I was told to stand in the corner whilst the others were taught. And that's how they treat people in those days. And obviously, you didn't stand a chance if you wanted to do something, or if you got something wrong, you just needed some guidance, and it just wasn't given. Anyway, so back to your original question. The army. A lot of friends at that time tended to be joining the army. And bear in mind, I was 15 when I left school. It's just my birthday's at the end of July, so the end of term was June. So you either stay on for another year or you leave. And obviously, because I had no hope in terms of qualifications, I left. And so I was 15, and some friends were joining the army, and they were coming back on leave, relatively short period after joining, telling me how wonderful it was, how they were traveling to places and doing things that I'd never done. And I thought, I've got to go. I've got to join. And I asked my parents, and initially my mother said, absolutely no. Dead against it. She said, you'll be beaten up, you'll be killed, you'll be pilloried, you'll be, all these sort of things. You'll be shouted at. She shouted at me enough, but, she didn't want anyone else to shout at me. So anyway, my dad got her to change her mind. As long as she said, you join something technical, you don't, and I remember her words, you're not going to become cannon fodder. I will not sign up for you to become cannon fodder. So that was the infantry, paras, and all that sort of out the window. So I joined the Royal Signals, and I remember the sergeant. You do these academic tests to join the army, and they position you where they think you're going to be, where you're best placed in the army. Because if you've got any intelligence, they're not going to put you, and no disrespect to the infantry, and I don't mean this at all, but if you're quite intelligent, they don't want you to be a fighting soldier, because you're going to get bored with that. and you leave the army. And they're very careful about their selection of people. So they did these tests and said to me, "You've got the intellect to be in a technical trade." And I thought, well, I just failed at school. What I didn't know, I had the inner ability, but I hadn't realized it. And so they said, we're going to put you in the role signals. And they explained to me, if you go and drive trucks, you're going to get bored and leave. And that's not what we want to happen. We want sustainability when people join the army. So they allocated me the signals and put me into a military college for 2 years.
Wow.
Which to me was a nightmare because I'd left school with nothing, as you remember.
Yeah.
I wasn't particularly good at maths, English, but I had to do City and Guilds advanced level in maths and English to pass through as a radio telegraphist in the signals. So anyway, I joined, and I went to Harrogate Army Apprentice College for a 2-year apprenticeship, and I remember walking into my maths lesson, having failed in the past at school, and there was an Irish teacher, and they were all 16-year-olds apart from me. I was just 16, just left 15 years. And he started to teach us, and a light was switched on. It just suddenly became really apparent that I knew what he was talking about. And what it was a different style of teaching. And he was teaching us like adults instead of juveniles. And the light just switched on, and I understood. I understood algebra. I understood fractions, divisions. It just came to me, and I thought, this is great. I'm now learning everything that I'd lost at school.
Yeah.
And I got through those 2 years, and I passed every one of the examinations, the maths, the English at advanced level, and all the other stuff. Typing, I learned to type, Morse code, antenna attenuation, working out how to send radio signals from here to Australia unhindered, all those sort of things. And I passed out. And I passed out in 1980.
1980.
Yeah.
Wow. It is. I mean, if you look at the way the signals are probably working today, it probably evolves more than any other section within the British Army, because the Army can't work without the signals and the Army Catering Corps. They're the two.
Well, to support that, the signals are the only corps that have a support section in the SES, integrated in the SES and the Parachute Regiment. We support all organisations. I say we, they.
Yeah.
Are the only, the greatest support corps to every unit in the British Army. Everybody needs communications.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they will train their own people, don't get me wrong. So the SES are all trained in radio procedure. But when it comes to the expert stuff, the signals are ingrained in their units to give them that support. And that's what happened to me in my career. I ended up supporting various different units as I went along.
So we've gone through our basic training, and nothing's really happening. We've got Northern Irelands going on in the background, isn't it? I mean, did you get to go there?
No, and that I suppose that is the advantage of being in a corps as opposed to a regiment. So
Yeah.
a regiment are your Royal Green Jackets, your Scots Guards, etc., etc. Being a support, like engineers, Royal Signals, because you're supporting, you don't go as a unit and spend 3 years in Northern Ireland. You would go there to support a regiment that's out there. And that's on an opportunity arise situation.
Right.
So it never arose with me. I got sent to different places like Cyprus, like Germany, Belize, and then obviously the Falklands as well. all in that support of, the regiments that were doing what they had to do. But Northern Ireland, I never got the opportunity to go. And to be perfectly honest, I'm quite happy with that. Really, I'm quite happy to be to sit back and say that I didn't put myself in all those dangers.
But you were put in danger because in 1982, Keith Dobson, this 20-year-old soldier with the signals, and his mates are then deployed to the Falklands. How did that all come about for you?
Well, just to correct you, and you're in the music world, but I was 19.
19. Paul Hardcastle.
That's right. Yeah, I love that record. Yeah, I was 19. So, yes, I was. I was in a unit called 8th Field Force, and that was based in Tidworth in Hampshire, on the border between Tidworth and Hampshire and Wiltshire. And obviously the writing was on the wall with the Falklands, and of course at a strategic level and at government level, that we're working out what response they could do to the build-up of intelligence in Argentina. So we something very quickly happened to us. We got moved to Aldershot, renamed, rebadged, and we were there to support an infantry brigade was formed called 5 Infantry Brigade. It was reformed. It existed in the past in various different periods in history in India and stuff like that. And it was reformed, and we were moved to Aldershot, and we did a lot of the battle training in Aldershot, and the support, the signals communication support for the paras and the infantry units that were based there. And then along comes this exercise on Brecon Beacons, where we get sent there, and we do this very unusual training, where we get to fire ground-to-air missile weapons, throw grenades. And we think this is all very unusual, because we're Sparkies, we're signals. We sit in Land Rovers and communicate and with headphones on and stuff like that. But we're doing some of the real gritty stuff. And then after that exercise, quite a infamous exercise, because it was planned to train us in extracting expats from an island somewhere, and we just thought that was business as usual. We didn't know what was bubbling in the background, and then we got told, and how they told us. We all got assembled, and they said, "It looks like we're going down to the Falklands." And of course, at that time, and you hear this anecdotally all the time, people just didn't know where the Falklands were, and so we all got given what we call an MFO box. And if you don't know what an MFO box is about the size of a coffin, but it's square. It's quite a high box, and it's what the boxes that families are given when they move. It's a wooden box with handles on the side and a lid, and you screw the lid on. And families in the army, when they move from one country to another, they put all their belongings, their house belongings, into MFO boxes. And I lived in accommodation in Aldershot. I was single, and we all got given an MFO box, and we got told before we leave, we have to fill this MFO box with all of our belongings and write a letter to our mothers, because this box will not be opened unless we die. So we had to put everything from our lockers, all our personal stuff that we weren't taking to the Falklands, and all you took to the Falklands was military stuff, of course, apart from a pair of underpants and a string vest or whatever. Yeah. And in the MFO box, everything went in. And we had to sit that evening and write a letter to our mothers or our closest people, which were generally mother, father, and write a letter to say, "I love you. I'm sorry it's ended this way. Please look after, this is my stuff that's left." So we did that. It was very macabre. And I remember we all sat there, wrote the letter, put in the MFO box, screwed the lid down. And then the next day we went in the world's biggest convoy on the motorway. I can't remember which route we took down to Southampton towards the QE2. And I remember being on this convoy, and it was amazing. Sitting in the front of a Land Rover, and cars were overtaken and zipping into the convoy. And I remember this car with this little kid in the back of the car, and he was scribbling on paper, and he held this bit of paper up to us, and it said, "Good luck, boys." And it's just so emotional when you you think back to that sort of thing, and what was going through not just our minds, but the minds of the population, that in our living memory that we were going to war. Incredible. And it was incredible.
Yeah, it was incredible. I remember I was 17 or 16 when it all started, but yeah, it was an incredible sort of feeling. The patriotism was second to none. So you get to Southampton and you go on the QE2. The QE2, most prestigious vessel in the world at that time. What was that like? You're there with a load of other squaddies. You're taking over this cruise liner.
Well, my expectations were dented very quickly because I arrived at Southampton, and the QE2 was there, and there were a number of other ships that were close, harboured next to the QE2. And I remember my boss, Trevor Bradley, who Trevor will never forgive me for mentioning his name if ever he hears this, because I still connect. I see Trevor every year. He was my section commander, and he got into my Land Rover, and I was queuing up to get on the QE2 to drive this Land Rover on. Remember, I was Signals, so Signals we did all the secret stuff, all the codes, encoding, encryption. We had all the radios that people weren't allowed to see.
Yeah,
I call them radios. They weren't even radios. People weren't allowed to see. It was equipment. And Trevor got on the Land Rover and he says, "Keith, there's been a change of plan." And I'm like sixth vehicle to get on the QE2. There's 5 in front of me. And I can smell the chefs, they're cooking the evening meal, which is obviously will involve caviar and salmon.
Of course.
And, all that sort of stuff. And he said, "There's a change of plan. We need somebody who is vetted to a high level to go on one of the ships that is going to go sort of clandestinely to the Falklands, which has all the secure equipment on. So we need you to go on that ship over there." And I looked over and I thought, it's a joke. It was a flat-bottomed cross-channel ferry called the Baltic Ferry. And he said, "We've got all the crypto stuff on there, and we need a selection of people who have a DV. Not everybody had it, to go on there. And you're going to go on down there as an advance party before the QE2. So you'll get there before the QE2, but you're going to have to go on there." And I just tears rolled down my face as I saw all my mates, the whole unit, getting onto this wonderful ship called the QE2, and I had to get on this flat-bottomed cross-channel ferry. Having said it, it was great, because you look at all the publicity about the QE2 and all the filming and all the journalists were on there, the world attention was on there. We had a great time going down there. Apart from the storms and, any large waves rocked us from left to right all the time. Yeah. But we were left unhindered. No journalists on our ship. And we just enjoyed we enjoyed the experience in terms of not being in the world's eye, going down there. So I ended up on a...
Because they had to, they didn't actually, the QE2 didn't actually arrive at the Falklands, did it? They had to transfer people off of it because they were worried about the... it was such an iconic ship.
first and foremost, if Argentina had have sunk the QE2, that would have I think the morale in the UK would have been significantly dented.
Yeah.
If our greatest ship ever had have been hit. So yes, but that created a number of other issues, and a number of close friends of mine were, because my unit was on the QE2. I was on the Falklands about a week before, and I helped to dig trenches, waiting for my pals to come over. And the day they arrived, they were put onto landcraft, and quite a number of them were bombed in Bomb Alley, right. Of which some of my friends were on those. And the amount of crypto equipment put in white bags with bits of heavy metal and thrown overboard is unbelievable, because these landing crafts were significantly hit, and they had to get rid of and destroy a lot of the equipment that we had. So we were crippled on day one, because a lot of the stuff that we took across there to use for our secure communications, we destroyed it ourselves because of the threat of the enemy taking it away from us.
Wow. So you've arrived, you're on an advance party. At what point did you land?
I landed, it was probably, I think, in the last week of May. And I landed, and I remember so we had a church service. We were to, basically what we were informed is we were going to, because I had this Land Rover, an Arctic Land Rover with secure equipment in there, radios and stuff like that. And I was going to be support for headquarters or whatever. Nothing had been decided at that point. And we were told that my packet was going to leave the ship at about 3:00 in the morning in darkness. So we landed in the Falklands Sound off Port Stanley. And all you could hear was, when we were on the ship, you could hear the racket of gunfire. You could see tracer going through the sky. The odd explosion occurred, and it was terrifying. So I remember at midnight, the Padre pulled us all together on the top deck, and he said basically, didn't care whether we were religious or not. Everybody had to attend. The captain had said that. So we had a church service, and we said a prayer, and, to our parents, our loved ones, and stuff like that, whatever religion you were. And then at 3:00 in the morning, it was all dark. All the lights were off, obviously, no lights whatsoever on the ship. And my packet was called. That was me, and because I was in charge of the section, I was promoted a corporal I was a lance corporal, but promoted a corporal for the war. 19 years old.
Wow.
In charge of a number of people, 5 people. 5 signalers who had varying different skills in what they were able to do. And we drove the Land Rover onto the landing craft, and then the landing craft neared the shore, and we had no briefing. We didn't know where we were going to go. We were just told, drive off the landing craft, drive until you're on dry land, and then get out the Land Rover and then cover, go for cover. And then somebody will come and guide you where you need to go. And then, as I say, the backdrop is this firing, these tracers, these explosions nearby, some of them distant, but some of them so nearby that it's scary. Mm. And I remember driving the Land Rover off the landing craft, and the front wheels jutted downwards because the landing craft hadn't quite got to where the shore was, and the Land Rover went into the water. And I remember water coming in through the door. We had the exhausts on which went upwards, for the Arctic Land Rovers, and there was literally water coming in the sides, and it was pitch black, no lights on or anything, and the only light came from tracer shots or explosions. And I drove onto the beach. And as soon as I drove onto the beach and stopped, the Land Rover listed, and I was in sand it was sinking in the sand on one side, and it went right over to the right, and I couldn't get out of it. It was stuck, and I thought, right, okay, guys. So I got all the guys to get as much stuff out of the Land Rover as we could, and we had some pretty high security stuff in there. So we buried it. We just dug and buried it, put rocks on it so we knew where it was, and then went into cover. And then eventually we got, I think it was Scots Guards or Marines, it was Marines, came over and said, right, you need to come up here, follow us. And we went up, and then we had a briefing that you don't go beyond this point. It's enemy territory. It hasn't been explored. It hasn't been cleared. You don't smoke. You don't light anything up. You don't use torches. And we'll wait till daylight, and then things will be clearer, obviously. And then somebody came in and said, we were in a sort of a dugout area, and we had tarpaulin that was over the area. And this guy came in, a sergeant major, and he said, look, I need to form a patrol because we've lost an officer who's come off the ship, and we don't know where he is, but we think he may be further down the beach. So we had to form into various sections and go out on patrol, but knowing that there were areas that were absolutely no-go because it hadn't been cleared. They didn't know if there was enemy in there. And we were given various passwords to, if you come across anyone, you to use this word so you recognize that your blue forces, and we did that. And then the next day, daylight came, and then we were told to dig trenches for ourselves. Still no real brief on what we're going to do, who we're going to be attached to, anything like that. And then the planes start coming across, the Mirages and some of the low flying stuff comes across. Air raid raids, they're bombing the ground. They're the Puma helicopters and Sea Kings are disappearing into valleys to get away from the aircraft that are bombing. And then it went on like that.
That's a hell of a description you just put in there, mate. I've got to say. How did it finish for you, though? I mean, you've moved forward at some point, and the forces that are with you, they've taken, Port Stanley and the Governor's House and everything else. But how did it finish for you, the Falklands?
So again, Trevor Bradley, and again, he'll not forgive me for this, but he said, look, you've got a choice, Keith. He said, you can either come back on a Hercules or we'll fly to the Ascension Islands and go back, or I really need somebody with a vetting to go on a ship.
That bloody vetting.
Yeah, I know, to go on a ship and come back. Unfortunately, this time I was nominated to go, but with a number of really good mates of mine who we'd been through a lot. Andy Turner being one of them. I remember Andy very well. And he was a good buddy of mine and still is. And so we got on this ship, again, flat bottom. This was called the Nordic Ferry, Townsend Torreson. And but before we came back, we were assigned to go down to Grytviken, South Sandwich Islands, to pick up the Marines that had taken South Georgia,
right,
and the islands down there. So we went down to South Georgia. So I ended up in the Antarctic Circle. And it was pretty cold.
Yeah.
And we picked up the Marines from there. We picked up some bodies from there of those that had died. And this is one of the regrets of my life. I have a photograph of me on the ship with an iceberg on South Georgia. And at the top of that iceberg, or just behind it somewhere, is Ernest Shackleton's grave. And I've read Shackleton, the journeys of Shackleton, one of our greatest explorers, and he died on the island there and is buried there. And if I had have known at that particular point in time, I would have done everything in my power to get off and
go and have a look,
go and pay my respects to Ernest Shackleton. So, but anyway, we picked up the Marines, and then we had a sail over to the Ascensions. We dropped some bodies off, and quite a few of the Marines. They were to fly back to the UK, and then we sailed back up the coast of Africa very casually over a period of like 8 weeks, whilst everybody landed back in the first few days. And to be honest, for me, and I feel the others with me, we've been through so much. We were not in a rush to come back.
No,
we'd been through so much that to switch off and be straight back with your families overnight within a couple of days just didn't seem attractive. So it was almost like therapy to take our time and come back under our own steam, at our own speed, and sort our lives out, because we were such young people and had been through so much. Suddenly we were adults. Yeah. Suddenly we were veterans, and we were just young kids. And I just felt that therapy of coming back slow time helped me to readjust my life at that time.
Did you see there's some classic or iconic photographs of where the Galahad, the Tristan, all those, were you conscious of that taking place whilst you were down there?
Yeah, of course. I ended up providing communications for a Royal Corps transport unit who was allocated the responsibility of the administration of prisoners. So it was setting up, of course, they didn't guard the prisoners. It was all about the strategic allocation of them, administration, food, electricity, compounds, areas to put them, because we're taking thousands of prisoners at some time. Just Goose Green alone, I mean, there was hundreds and hundreds of prisoners, and what do you do with them? So you had to have a highly skilled sort of unit to look at all the issues around that operationally and strategically. So I did the communications for them, and a lot of the communications was I'd get called by an SES patrol, Marines or whatever, saying that we've taken 25 prisoners. What do you want us to do with them? And I would, that was generally done in encoded, because they didn't want to give away where their position was or where the prisoners were coming from. Yeah. Because Argentinian command needed to think that they still had forces in certain areas, and I would pass a message to an officer who would then delegate an area for those prisoners to be taken to. So I get back to that patrol, give them their grid reference, and they would bring them either to where we were and then be dispatched to where a compound was. On occasions, they didn't bring back as many as what they started off on the journey with. The SES were obviously needed to get, it was about resource, and we've seen that in the police, although prisoners don't disappear. No, but don't. People can't keep up with the pace or whatever, or injured, and they die on the way back and stuff like that. So anyway, because of that, on occasions, there was one occasion that I get this, because we were generally using smaller HF, high frequency radios, and encoding everything, because a lot of our encrypted stuff had been lost or was useless. So I had some generators, 3.5 kVA generators, which were to feed the more encrypted radios, but were useless. So one day I get contacted and told to some prisoners in one of the compound, they've got no electricity, no hot water. Can you, and it was Goose Green, can you go and set up the generators and give the prisoners some hot water and some electricity. And I said, yeah, okay then. So Sea King comes along and picks me up, and we fly across the safe area, the taken areas of the Falklands. And we landed, actually, for one reason or another, we landed at Fitzroy, where it coincided. Some of my pals were setting up a headquarters there. Right. And the Galahad had just recently been hit. Wow. And they were dealing with all the the consequences of what had happened, the prisoners, so that there was hospitals everywhere, there were people being treated everywhere and stuff like that. So I spent a little bit of time there, and then I flew on to Goose Green, and there was Scots Guards were guarding the prisoners there. And I remember going into this. I physically walked into the compound, surrounded by Argentinian prisoners who were lying on the floor. Obviously, didn't have weapons. They could have had a knife, but soldiers are pretty good at searching. And walked amongst these people, and I was just fascinated at the age group. They went from 14 to 60 in age, and they were very sullen people. They were very, despondent and sad. And but when I gave them electricity and got a Burker boiler on for a cup of tea, they were elated, and I got lots of pats on the back and stuff like that. So it was a very uncomfortable environment, I should say, because there was still the enemy, and people were still dying. So they weren't my friends by any means, but I do remember that they were very grateful.
But there's humanity as well. I think doing what we've done, you've got to have that humility and humanity to deal with people. And the fact is, a lot of those people were there. They were press ganged into joining the Argentinian forces. They were sent over there. I'm not saying against their will, but they were certainly not the willing volunteers that were portrayed.
No, they were press ganged, and some of them felt that they were on some of them believed that they were in the south of Argentina. They didn't know that they were on the Malvinas. They felt they got on a ship and they thought the ship had docked
gone down
further
the coast.
down in Argentina. But it was really tragic personally for me, because I think it was the 6th of June. My OC, Major Michael Forge, and I was in B troop, and my staff sergeant was Al Jeanette, and then there was Alpha troop. So the squadron I was in was split into two. Yeah. And their staff sergeant was Joe Baker, who I knew very, very well. And Major Michael Forge and Joe Baker were flying in a Gazelle helicopter. And they were taking supplies and some encrypting equipment to one of our units on a hill, on a rebroadcast station. And the Gazelle was mistaken for a Hercules, believe it or not. It was they were flying in a channel that the Argentinians used, an air channel, frequented by Hercules aircraft. And HMS Cardiff sent a couple of sea darts up and blew them out the sky. The pilot, the co-pilot, my OC and staff sergeant all perished. And that was a huge blow. That was a massive blow to our squadron. When that happened, it's the leader. Your leaders have gone under such tragic circumstances, blue on blue. And that really cut into many of us. And then you lose hope in a lot of ways when it's close and it's personal.
That's terrible. And do you know what? Those poor souls that push the button as well. Yes. They're just they're sitting there today thinking about that very day, the 6th of June, 1982. So all this death and destruction, and you've come back. You're decompressing on the ferry, the Townsend Torreson ferry, and you
decompressing has a word with many meanings.
It does, yeah.
Getting drunk,
getting drunk and going across the equator.
Yeah.
You arrived back in the UK. Where did you dock?
Southampton, and to much the army had paid for close family members to come and stay down in accommodation, which was a surprise. I didn't know, no idea. So we're arriving back, and we have this amnesty whereby we get told whatever possessions that you've taken from prisoners, particularly if they're firearms, there's an amnesty, hand them in. So I kept, there's certain things that you do keep. I kept my boots and my Argentinian helmets and, stuff like that, the inane stuff. But the things like the weapons, and I did have a Belgian FN fold and butt that I handed in, as did many other soldiers, and quite rightly too, because, they fall in the hands of criminals or the IRA, and it's, we're contributing to the deaths of other people. So the weapons were handed in, and then we docked at Southampton with that. You've seen the pictures, the Union Jacks, the crowds on many levels, and the bands and the pomp and circumstance and all that sort of stuff. And then we all got searched. This was the other thing. We went into a big hangar, and because we had vehicles, they searched everything because they wanted to make sure that we didn't have those trophies, those weapons. They weren't too bothered about the boots and the helmets and stuff like that, but it was the knives and stuff like that that people had taken. So they searched us. The RMPs, and then we were released into a reception area, and there was my mother. And my mother had come down, and of course I had a girlfriend then at the time, but I think the army was limited on how many people could come, and it was the closest that they contacted. And so me and my mum went out on the town in Southampton, and of course everywhere you went was free. Everybody knew that you had returned that day or were one of the returning ships, and every pub, every restaurant, everything was just free.
Fantastic.
And everybody was your friend. And then we travelled back. I had a train warrant that said you've got some, I don't know, I think a couple of months of leave.
Wow.
Of course, it's a stack of money. I could buy a car. I had so much money. And I did 250 quid on an escort, wow. Because you'd not spent anything. Plus, you'd earned the X Factor money. You were in a war environment, so you get paid a little bit more, but I don't know, 20 pence a day or whatever it was in those days. And we went up, and then a surprise party. My mum had arranged a street party for me when I got back, and all my relatives and all my extended family were there. And the first thing I did was, as I say, I paid 250 quid, got a green Escort with furry seats and furry dice and a cassette tape of Brian Ferry, and scooted down to Harrogate and back to my girlfriend.
Bloody hell.
And enjoyed the leave before going back.
That's incredible. I mean, Brian Ferry, he's a Northeast lad as well, isn't he? But it is, honestly, mate, I find it absolutely fascinating. And I know the area. My family are from Middlesbrough, and I know and how proud they are of the armed forces up there. It is they're absolutely wrapped with it. Do your kids know any of these stories?
Yeah, I'm not well, I've written a book, so I suppose you can't say I don't tell stories, but it's taken a long time to talk about things that happened.
Yeah.
And particularly when your kids come later, so they're of a generation that don't really understand. I mean, I went to Berlin when the Berlin Wall was up. and I went to Checkpoint Charlie. Have you been to Berlin?
I have, long time ago.
Did you go when the wall was?
I was a kid, yeah. So that was, yeah. But I was very small.
Military family.
We We lived in Munster and whatever. So yeah, it's
So we went on the Berliner, which was the train that drove through East Germany, and you had to go in uniform. A Soviet guard got on the train at Potsdam and checked not your papers, but the papers of everybody else, because that was the agreement if you were a soldier. Then you go to Berlin, and we were able to get a trip into the East. We were followed by Stasi. They were so apparent. They manipulated where we could go, and it was all to see Stalinism, Stalin statues, the crushing of the swastika, the unknown soldiers burning flame. All that was all set up for us and stuff like that. Went through the wall, and then you had to come queue through the wall to get back through, and people, with guns and stuff like that. Now, put yourself with kids who are 20 years old, 30 years old, or whatever, and say there was once this city that had a huge wall around it. And if you left this city or tried to get into this city, you were shot dead. And tell people nowadays about that, they say, what kind of books have you been reading? Yeah. This is all fiction. This is not true. But it is.
Yeah, it is absolutely
and we
true.
lived through all that. So, yes, I tell my kids about it, but it's a very, very watered down version of the reality of it, because they quickly get bored thinking, this can't be true.
I hope they listen to this, mate. So what year did you finish in the military?
Right. So I'd always said, so I eventually got married. We traveled to Germany. I had some stints in a couple of stints in Cyprus, Belize, as I mentioned earlier. And then, but we'd always said that if we have the day we have a child is a day that we reevaluate our life in the forces, because I just didn't feel, personally speaking, that I was comfortable bringing a child up in a forces environment. And that wasn't because the forces in any way didn't care for people with children, but it was a personal thing, because you have to take them out of schooling into a different school, maybe into a different country, or put them in boarding school, which I thought, what's the point, of having children and never seeing them? And there was all those sort of things that we said, for our quality of life as parents with a child, we personally feel that the forces wasn't the right place. So in 1990, or 89, Karen got pregnant, and we decided that I should put my notice in, which I did. Which I, at the time, I recall being very, very sad about it, because it was my life. Everything that I'd grown up with was there. But to leave was the right thing to do, and the right thing for our children. So I left, and so 1990.
So did you get a half pension or did you transfer that into policing?
Yeah. Joined the police initially because I pushed back on joining the police, because most soldiers, or a majority of soldiers, tended to feel that the police was a replacement from the forces. And I didn't want to replace something. I wanted to fight for something myself. And that goes back to my younger days, my mum saying, you can do better, use your skills and get out there and do something. And I didn't want to follow the crowd, if you see what I mean. So I went into engineering, sales for a while, worked for a couple of companies, a Belgian company, had a few trips out there, work-related trips. Then I worked for a company in Yorkshire for a while. But it was a comradeship that I wasn't getting. I was in a big wide world with cutthroat, competitive people who would cut your legs off to get to a position above you, and quite ruthless. Not honest, I didn't think, the world that I was working in. And I thought, well, maybe I should look towards the police and get back to that environment where people are doing the right thing for people, for the Queen country and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I joined West Yorkshire Police in 1993, May 1993. Trained at Durham. And my first posting in the police was in Dewsbury in West Yorkshire.
Oh, right, yeah. Know it well. I spent a long time up there on different inquiries. You. If we go back a step, your dad was in, he worked for the Central Electricity Generating Board. You've had the miners' strike going on up there as well. What was that like being, because there were times where they said they were going to put soldiers to support the police and all those types of things. What was that like for your family?
Well, fortunately, when I go back on the years, the miners' strike took place just before I was deployed back to the UK from Germany. And I remember being in Germany, and fellow soldiers out there would see the news, be watching the news, see the soldiers that were deployed into the Yorkshire mines. It wasn't just Yorkshire, obviously, it was all over the country. And we were sitting in Germany, and I remember conversations were around the lines of, thank God we're out here. Mm. We do not want to be battling against our own people. And that's how we saw it. It was almost a civil war was going on back in the UK. And we were so happy to have the opportunity to not be part of it. So when I joined the police those years later, yes, I was in places like Pontefract, Selby, places, battlegrounds for the police and the miners. And of course, I was policing that hatred that still was entrenched and was part of the DNA of the communities, were that the police were the enemy. So I'd come from the forces, now wearing the uniform of a constable, and was hated by the very people that, were my fellow civilians, colleagues, whatever, back in the UK after having been through a war and been through Germany and lived through the Cold War and stuff like that. And so, it was a really strange environment working with all these people that just hated the police.
And that's a real shame, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, you've been held up as a hero because with everybody else that served in the Falklands, and now you're coming back and being vilified for taking another role to working for the Crown.
Yeah.
When you're in West Yorkshire, how did you find the transition from the military to the police? What was it like for you?
I found it difficult to begin with. I think I had misguided expectations of the police because I felt because the military is very disciplined and you go in the direction that you're told to go. Yes, you use your own skills and ability, but it's very, very much set out what you're going to do. Suddenly in an environment where the police, you have to think for yourself. You have to, yes, you're told what to do and where to go, but you're on your own, kid. When you're out there, you've got to make the decisions, sometimes life-threatening decisions. So I think for a soldier, it's much easier to be a police officer. And I was 28. So when I joined the police, so yes, I had a lot of experience, and I was able to cope much better because of the military background. What I didn't expect is what I saw with some police officers, which were police officers come in many forms. Most of them, I have to say, are extremely professional, extremely skilled in what they do, and are determined to make things right and make things happen. But I just couldn't believe the amount that, were a little bit lazy and didn't go on their beats when they were told to do it and stuff like that. And that shocked me quite a bit. Having come from that disciplined environment to an environment where, because people could do what they wanted, there were one or two that were just a bit mischievous.
Yeah, sometimes they did do exactly what they wanted. Yeah, I mean, I came from a very structured background with my dad. He was in the military and he was in the police. And I think that, well, you worked with me, you know what I was like. That sort of came through into my policing style and dealing with people. But
it does, yeah.
We're not all the same. How long did you serve in West Yorkshire?
I served until 2005, and it was in 2003 that I was told I had hemochromatosis. And had to take a different sort of pace in life. I'm not sure. Are you aware of hemochromatosis?
No.
So hemochromatosis is a genetic disease condition, and basically, I have very high ferritin levels, which is iron in my blood, and if left unseen, the consequences are liver damage, heart failure, round about your 60s, 70s, and that sort of age group, if it's not identified. Now, fortunately, it was identified. My sister had a blood condition, and the doctor was really skilled enough to say, get your brothers to go for a hemochromatosis test, which I did. And I was found to have normal levels of iron in a male blood would be about 270. I had 770 measurement in mine, which was at like extreme levels. So I had to go for what they call for venisections over a 12-month period, every month given a litre of blood to reduce the iron levels.
Wow.
But the consultant said to me at that time, what's your job? I said, a police officer. I'm a detective. I think I was detective sergeant at that time. And he said, you've really got to think of a career, changing your career choice at the moment, because you need to take things easy. You need to look after your health a lot more. You need to think about your future, because and they did test me for degeneration of internal organs, and they said, you're fine, we've caught it early, and you'll be on a maintenance program, which is you have to give a litre of blood periodically over a year for the rest of your life to keep those iron levels down. It's the only way you can keep the iron down is to expel blood. So, but he says you've got to take life easy. So I thought, right, okay, think of the future. And what we did is we bought a place in France because I didn't want to retire from the police, because I just didn't want to stop working, and I didn't personally feel that I needed to take a career choice. I think we can all work at a pace in policing that suits policing, but can work with you as well. And so I decided to we buy a place in France, and it's something we can retire to, so I could take it easy over there. That was in 2005. And then I'd transfer to a force that was closer to France. So my family would move over to France at that time, and I'd work for a force, and then when I can, get across, but continue to pay the bills and that sort of thing. And I looked at Kent. I didn't quite like some of the criteria that they were asking for. And then I looked at Essex and thought, wow, that looks a great force to work for. It's got the variety. It's near London. It's got some really difficult places to work and some not so difficult. And it was at the time David Stevens was the chief constable at that time. And so I applied to go to Essex Police. And a very, very quick, very slick sort of process. I think I should have thought through it. Why did they need me so quickly? Why did they want me so badly? I didn't quite work that out. I could have been a bit more astute to what was going on. And I came down, and a guy rang me, and he had a Geordie accent, and I thought, this is great. There's a Geordie works down there, and I feel, make me feel a bit at home. And he said, come and bring your family down and come and have a look at where you're going to work. And I went to Chelmsford and I had an interview, and Geordie Tyson sat in front of me and interviewed me. And he says, I'll just take you down to where we want you to go. He said, well, to be honest, he said, where do you want to go? And I said, busy. I want to go busy. I don't do quiet. I've got to do busy. Even having this consultant say you've got to take life in an easier place. And he says, we've got a great spot for you. And at that time, I was a DI. And he said, but it's not in CID, but you'll quickly get back into CID. It's a uniform post, but we want you to go to Tilbury because we're having problems recruiting an inspector for Tilbury. And I said, what's it like? And he said, oh, it's busy. You want busy? Tilbury's busy. We'll take you down to Grays. And Tilbury. And I remember arriving in Tilbury and seeing this fortress, this blue, the walls were painted blue and white, and it had barbed wire. Yeah, it was something like out of Belfast.
Yeah.
And I thought, whoa, this is a bit sort of in your face, because I come from West Yorkshire following the riots there, where we'd taken glass screens away from the front of police receptions, and we were much more ingrained with and in touch with the communities and that sort of thing. And yet here was a police station which was saying to everybody, don't come anywhere near us. This is our fortress, and we will fight to the end when, if you attack. And that was my introduction. And I remember Karen and the two kids in the car, and I drove them through Grays, and I got to love Grays eventually, if you can say that. I suppose I'm just being a little bit polite, really. And I remember my wife and kids and their faces, and they just couldn't say anything. They said, Dad, do you really want to work here? And I said, I don't see it through the same set of eyes. I think this is great. Here's challenges, here's opportunities. And that was my policing and life sort of thing. I saw this is where I really want to work. And so that's it. That's my sort of start with Essex Police.
At Tilbury, I worked on 7 murders in 9 months in Tilbury.
Yeah.
I mean, they are salt of the earth people down there. There's some great people, but they soon let you know if they're not happy with something. Yeah,
and it became there was some real challenges around the ethnic communities down there, and the stevedores, I think, were the descendants of the shipbuilders, shipmakers. And it was very much racism was a huge issue, and I got involved with a lot of community support groups. But besides that, there were a lot of career criminals there, who made it their job to keep us really, really busy. Yeah, and then we amalgamated into and John Basildon.
Yeah.
And so we had Basildon and Grays together and I eventually got promoted to DCI there, and serving under a great mate of mine, Simon Coxall, who you've interviewed on this show. And I love Simon.
Yeah.
He's a great role model, Simon. I love working for him.
Yeah.
And then eventually Glenn Caton, who again, fantastic. What a mentor he was when I did my strategic firearms. Glenn was, you could not ask for a better tutor than Glenn. I learned so much from Glenn.
Oh, cool. And then, of course, you come to Harlow, where we worked together.
Well, Brentwood to begin with.
Oh, yeah, Brentwood. I remember that phone call.
Yeah, Brentwood.
I remember that phone call when somebody's finance officer got arrested, and you were the chief inspector there, and you got a phone call from somebody.
Oh, yeah,
Mr. Sugar,
Mr. Sugar,
Lord Sugar.
So I'm in the office at Brentwood, a bit uncomfortable because I'm back in uniform as a chief inspector from CID. Being thrown all these performance measures and stuff like that, and somebody rings up from the reception that said, "We've got a call. We need to transfer to you." And I said, "Yes. Who is it?" And they said, "It's Sir Alan Sugar." I said, "Get out of here! Get out! No way! No way!" It's a genuine wind up, isn't it? It's my first day. I'm being wound up, and I thought, yeah, put them through. And I thought it'll be bloody Maleary or something. It'll be, I'll suss this one out straight away. Anyway, he spoke on the phone. It was Alan Sugar.
Yeah. We won't go into detail while he phoned, but he wasn't very happy, was he, with one of our members of staff. But I mean, I remember that day. That was hilarious because we were trying to deal with the fallout from what that officer had actually done. So
yes.
You've done your time in Essex, and you've enjoyed it. You've been successful there, but you decided that you needed to make that change again. Promotions, opportunities, and you like a challenge. So you went to the Metropolitan Police.
Well, it was more than that. I thought, right, okay, I've got something like 5 years left to do. I'm a chief inspector. I might as well try and go for superintendent. I might as well end up, at that strategic level if I can. And I did a couple of applications for Essex and didn't really. And quite rightly, I got the feedback. I wasn't quite ready for it and stuff like that. And I sat on my hands for a while. And I was a temporary superintendent anyway, so I didn't really have to get promoted because I could have seen that out to the end. But like you say, I wanted the challenge. And then somebody said to me, the Met are asking for interviews for substantive superintendent. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, the Met. Wow, I've never, I've been in West Yorkshire, served in Essex, but the Met was a different animal. It was, I'd heard so many really good things about the Met, but equally a lot of bad things. And I'd served with officers who come from the Met who seemed to be all running away from something. And I decided that I'd put the application in, but somebody said to me, don't even bother. You won't get it. They're so, at strategic level, they will only promote their own people. And you won't get it. So it's a paper exercise. You're not going to get it. And again, that sets me up to a challenge. Somebody's like saying, you can't have it, you can't do it. And I go back to my mother saying, you can do better. You can always do better. And little did I know, but Bernard Hogan Howe was had gone through selection. He was just about to become the commissioner and had become the commissioner by the time that the process came to the interviews. And I think what he wanted, and quite rightly, because I do believe in this, he wanted the diversity of bringing people from outside the Met into the Met to break down some of the barriers and some of the myths about the Met, to bring people in who had different experiences and stuff like that. And I think his brief to his interviewers were to keep an eye on, some skilled people who are bringing some skills into the Met. And so I got interviewed and I got selected. And in those days, I can remember they were recruiting something like between 56 and 72 superintendents each year.
Incredible.
The numbers were massive. Now, I'm not putting myself down because it wasn't easy to get through. And I got interviewed by one of the most difficult people in the Met, a Met commander. I forget his first name, but and he'll not forgive me for this. He was SIO for the Dando murder,
right.
Campbell. Hamish Campbell, very revered, respected person in the Met, known as the barrister because he got into the minutiae. And he interviewed me, and we got on great during the interview. And anyway, I got through, got promoted, and and Steve Kavanagh, who was to be my he was DSC, responsible for that recruitment drive, posted me to Enfield immediately as a borough commander. Wow. So I was superintendent, but didn't have a borough commander. So I was temporary borough commander at Enfield, day one, when I went into the largest police force in the country, with the biggest issues, with the biggest challenges. And I had 600 people under me, officers and staff, as a borough commander. And it wasn't easy.
No,
it wasn't easy at all.
That is real stress. Are you pleased that you made the jump?
Yeah, I think it's just an accession of my life. It's just, one thing after the other. It's I see my life as a novel, as a book, and it's got many chapters. There's not many left, but I see everything I've done in my life as one chapter after another. And with chapter, you get closure, and then you get beginnings. And that was a new beginning to my life. And I've always been supported by a great family. My wife, bless her care, and she's supported me through all of this. And we married. We celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary last year. And through all this, she's been there as a rock. And my kids, Jack and Grace, they've always been there and supported me and moved with me. They've gone with what I wanted, much to their own cost, I have to say. But, bless them.
It is hard. So you then go on to the into the CT world.
Yeah, SO20 in Scotland Yard.
I remember going to you had the most amazing office, the best views in London. I've still got a photograph of standing by the window, and you've got every iconic site behind you, Westminster Abbey, right the way across to the, you can just see everything in the distance. It's great. Yeah. What was the highlight of your policing career?
You probably asked loads of people the same question, and the answer is probably no different from most people. It's really difficult to pick something out when you've had such a varied career.
Yeah.
And I've been in CID, I've done public order, advanced public order, I've done firearms and attended and commanded firearms operations. And it's really difficult. But I suppose if I was to be romantic about it and emotive, it would go back to my CID days as being a DS and a DI on the ground, and all the days being in touch with people, getting the bad guys, going for the bad guys. And I worked on quite a few murders, and we used to, in West Yorkshire, because we're situated between Manchester, Merseyside, Newcastle and Leeds itself, you've got gangs going, vying for territory, vying for the drugs, rackets, knocking people off. And those were the days that there was some really significant murders up there. I ended up on one that was a bad on bad, where a significant nominal was shot in the head by somebody on a motorcycle who we knew had come from Manchester, and it was an execution. And that was, so you've asked about the highlight. The highlight was that it was a bad on bad murder, because those are particularly difficult because the public just don't want to come forward. And the only people who have information are institutionalized criminals.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have to work as a detective at varying different levels and understand the language of these people. And when I say language, I mean the way that they live, work, and treat people, to be able to even get anywhere near them, to interview them and talk to them. And there were so many interviews that were off the record. In fact, most of them were, turn that off, don't get any paper out, I'm not even going to sign anything. And those were the interviews, but you can't use them in evidence.
No.
So the challenges were massive. So yes, those were the days with a highlight in CID, doing the real gritty stuff.
I mean, I'm not going to go into the lowlights because we all know what they are around, your time that you lose with your family and the bullies within the organisation and things like that. So you're now retired, Keith Dobson, retired, moved back from France, settled back in the UK, and grafting away elsewhere. But you've also written a book.
Yeah, which was launched 2 days ago. Much to my surprise, the first run from the printers, the entire run was sold out in 3 hours.
Brilliant.
So we're having to go back to the printers to get more copies delivered to the suppliers, who will then deliver to Amazon, Waterstones, WH Smiths, etc. So yes, I did. I wrote a book.
You're very modest there, mate, because that's a hell of an achievement for a boy that hasn't got an O level. It's and I'm that fella as well, mate. But that is a hell of a. So how was the process for you for writing the book? I don't want you to go into the detail of the book because obviously I want people to buy it. First of all, what is your book called? Okay,
it's called Crossing the Line. And I wrote the book almost as a biographical memoir of my time in Belize as a young soldier in Belize. I spent 6 months in Central America. And that was one of the most bizarre postings and fantastic postings anybody could ever have. Living in a jungle environment in the Caribbean as a soldier for 6 months. It was every minute was a roller coaster ride in what was about to happen. And if it wasn't a tornado, if it wasn't providing or helping to provide medication for Mayan Indians up in the jungle, if it wasn't having a time off and traveling up to Mexico and getting into trouble up there, if it wasn't, having an encounter with an alligator or a tarantula or being bitten by a scorpion as I was, and it was just a roller coaster ride. So I wrote a biographical account of that, and I sent it off to a few publishers. And my family had said, get it published, don't just write it, because initially my motivation was just to write it, just to get an account on paper. And anyway, my kids said, and my wife said, send it off to a publisher. So I sent it to a few publishers, and I got some remarkable feedback. None of them really wanted to take it on because it was a biographical account. But there was one particular publisher, and he wrote what he called factional accounts, which is half fact, half fiction. And he said, Keith, try and reduce the amount of words and pages that you've put into it, but try and write it as a fictional account, because the beauty with that is you can make things up, you can make things sexy, you can make things really more exciting by stepping outside and introducing characters and stuff like that. So I just sat on it for a couple of years, and then my wife said, Keith, what you've done all that work, why let it sit there and stall? So then the pandemic came along, didn't it? And we all found some free time during the pandemic. And I decided to have a look at it and maybe just turn it into a fictionalized account of someone based on fact going to Belize soldiers. And so I wrote this, and I carried on. I couldn't stop. And it was based around people and places and things that had gone on in my life. And I came to the end of it, and I sent it off to a few publishers, and I just couldn't believe the response. I had 7 publishers who wanted to take me on.
Brilliant.
And I was then in a position where the dilemma was not trying to get it published, but trying to work out the best deal from all of these publishers. And the one I went with primarily because I learned so much about publishers, and it is a minefield, and it's really difficult. And they want to own your book because they want to make profit from it. They're investing in it, so they want their money back plus profit. And the one I chose it purely based on that they said that they would leave the copyright with me. They will not own the book at the end of the journey with them. But then they took it, the editor looked at it, and then the hard work began. Writing the book's not the hard work. It's agreeing and correcting the book after it's written. And my English was appalling because school and stuff like that. And it was like going back to English classes because the editor said, I will take you on this journey and you will learn. Because if you write another book, you need to understand that you need to correct it before you submit it. It's much easier for us then. So I learned so much about English literature and went through that journey with the editor and stuff like that. So, yes, we got to the end of it. And 2 days ago, it got launched. It's still in the launch period at the moment because there's going to be a press release and that sort of thing. But, it's on its way.
Congratulations. And do you know what? That's inspirational because I've got some very good friends who are very quick to pick up on my grammar. I don't know whether I've got a touch of dyslexia, but putting commas in the right places or semicolons, that wasn't what I did at school. That just wasn't that wasn't me. I'm like Keith Dobson. I went to school, walked away, and succeeded because I worked hard, not because I knew how to write an essay. And
I learned so many things, Paul. And one thing is never to put huge amounts of dialogue when you write a book, because dialogue comes with so many odd rules around it. You can put a capital letter after a comma in certain circumstances. And of course, I didn't learn that at school. And of course, in my book, there's tons of dialogue. There's, people are talking. And the danger is that that's where the hard work is, dialogue, getting it right. And there are some authors, J.K. Rowling is one, who go against the rules. And it's acceptable. It is acceptable for writers just to say, look, this is me. This is my style. I'm not going to apply those rules that you would do ordinarily. But what I've tried to do is keep it to some version of the rules.
That's brilliant. Well, let's hope you make as much money as she has through her Harry Potter books.
Hopefully.
Mate, before we conclude this interview, first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for your time, Keith. It's been great catching up with you. But is there anything you'd like to add, alter or correct in relation to the statement that you've made today?
I love it. It sounds like an interview, doesn't it? And I've listened to so many podcasts, so I know how you end these. But no, Paul, it's just been a pleasure. I've had a great ride. I've had a great time in Essex, and just to, let you know, I'll be down there soon. And we've had a few nights out when we've been able to get down there. But thanks for your friendship and all you've done. And you were a real good guy at Brentwood and at Harlow.
Thank you, mate.
So thanks.
No, thank you, and I wish you well.
Yeah, and you. Take care.